My name is Sarah, and everything I had worked for was stolen from me in an instant. It wasn't just the money, it was my future. I had spent months saving every penny, working every shift I could, just to afford the medical treatment I desperately needed. I was so close to finally getting ahead when I came home one evening exhausted and hopeful, only to find my father sitting at the kitchen table with the check I'd been waiting for. It wasn't just a check. It was my lifeline. But he didn't see it that way. He didn't even look up as I entered the room, the faint smell of cheap alcohol still lingering in the air. "Dad, where's the money?" I asked, already knowing the answer, but hoping I was wrong. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the pile of empty beer cans, his hands shaky as he fumbled with the unopened bills scattered around him. Then he finally spoke, his voice low but steady. "I needed it, Sarah. You're always worried about yourself." "I've been struggling too, you know." I felt the words hit me like a punch to the gut. This wasn't just any money. This was the money I had earned with endless hours of work, my last hope of getting the treatment I needed. And he had spent it on gambling. I stood there frozen, trying to process what had just happened. My hands trembled, my vision blurred. But the worst part, my mother, who had been silent all this time, looked at me with no surprise in her eyes. She didn't comfort me. Instead, she turned to me with that familiar dismissive tone. "You're ungrateful, Sarah," she said, her voice dripping with contempt. "He's been supporting you all these years, and this is how you repay him." I felt my heart drop into my stomach. The betrayal wasn't just from my father. It was from both of them. In that moment, I realized something. I wasn't just struggling with my illness. I was struggling with a family that didn't care about my future. A family that took everything from me, including my dignity. But this time, I wouldn't stay silent. I had been passive for too long, letting their control dictate my life. I had to fight back. That night, lying awake in bed, I felt the anger grow inside me. I couldn't do this anymore. I couldn't let them continue to steal my life away. My health, my future, my dreams, it all came down to this moment. It was time for me to take action, time to stop letting them decide my fate. The next few days were a blur of confusion and disbelief. I couldn't understand how my father could do this to me, how he could take everything I worked for and waste it on gambling. It wasn't just the money. It was the trust, the faith I had in him to support me when I needed him most. I had always looked up to him despite his flaws. He was my father after all. But now, standing in front of me, he was just another man who had let me down. That night, I tried to talk to him. I needed answers. I needed to know how he could justify this betrayal. I found him in the living room, sitting on the couch, his face buried in his hands. His usual bravado was gone, replaced by a look of guilt, but it wasn't enough. "Dad, how could you do this to me? I needed that money," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He didn't look up at me. His gaze was fixed on the floor, the weight of what he had done hanging in the air like a thick fog. "You don't understand," he muttered. "I had no choice. Things haven't been easy for me either." "No choice," I almost laughed, but the sound came out bitter. "You had a choice, Dad. You could have helped me. You could have been there when I needed you." I saw him flinch at my words, but he remained silent. The air between us was heavy, thick with unsaid things. Then my mother walked in. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed, and with a look on her face that I knew all too well. Disappointment, frustration, and something else I couldn't quite place. "You're making this worse than it needs to be, Sarah," she said coldly. "Your father's been through a lot. And you're just being selfish." My heart sank. She didn't care. She never did. Instead of defending me, she defended him as she always did. No matter what happened, she always sided with him. It was like she couldn't see the damage he was doing to me. I felt my chest tighten, the pressure of everything weighing on me. "Selfish," I repeated, my voice trembling. "I'm the one who's been working myself to the bone just to get by. I'm the one who's been sick, who's been fighting every day to survive, and all I ask for is a little support. But no, that's too much to ask, isn't it?" My mother stepped forward, her expression hardening. "You don't understand, Sarah. You never do. You think you're the only one with problems, but your father and you're just as bad as he is." I snapped, cutting her off. You stand by him every single time. You're both the same. She recoiled as if my words physically hurt her. You ungrateful child, she hissed. You wouldn't be where you are without us. I wanted to scream to break down in front of them, but I couldn't. Not anymore. The anger, the hurt, the betrayal. It was all too much. And yet, it wasn't enough to break me. It only fueled something inside me, something stronger than I had ever felt before. I don't need you, I whispered, but the words hit harder than I intended. I don't need either of you. My mother's face twisted in shock, and for a moment I thought I saw something like regret in her eyes, but it disappeared as quickly as it had come. You think you can make it on your own? She scoffed. You think you're better than us. That's the problem with you. You've always thought you were above everyone else. I shook my head. No, I just want to live my life without being held back by you two. You've already taken enough from me. The silence that followed was deafening. My father didn't say anything. My mother didn't either. It was as if the words had cut deeper than either of them were willing to admit. I turned to leave, but not before I heard my mother's voice low and venomous. You'll regret this, Sarah. You'll regret ever thinking you could live without us. Those words stayed with me long after I walked out of the room. I didn't know what the future held, but in that moment I knew I couldn't let them control me anymore. I couldn't let them dictate my life. It was time to fight back. Time to take back what they had taken from me. The days following my confrontation with my parents were a blur of emotions. I found myself in a constant state of turmoil, unsure of what to do next. My father's words echoed in my mind, as did my mother's biting criticisms. I kept replaying their voices in my head, the way they called me ungrateful, the way they made me feel like nothing I did was ever enough. It wasn't just about the money, it was about everything. My father had always been distant, unpredictable, and neglectful, but this was different. This time, he had taken something that was mine, something I had worked so hard for, and used it for his own selfish desires. I had always been the responsible one in the family, always doing my best to keep things together. But no matter how hard I tried, it never seemed to be enough. I was always the one trying to prove myself, trying to show that I could make it despite everything. Yet here I was, standing on the brink of losing everything. My health, my future, my ability to live the life I had been working toward. I didn't have time to waste feeling sorry for myself, though. I had too much at stake. But the despair kept creeping in, always lurking at the edges of my mind. The weight of my father's betrayal was too heavy to shake off easily. Every time I thought about the money, I thought about everything that had led me to this point. I thought about how my life had always been a series of struggles, from my health to my strained relationship with my parents. I had never felt like I truly had control of my life. They had always been the ones making decisions for me, dictating what I could or couldn't do, what was right and wrong. It felt like I was drowning with no way to reach the surface. But I couldn't let them break me. I had to find a way out, a way to get back on track. The first step was to figure out how to fix my situation. I couldn't just let my health suffer, and I couldn't let my father's actions derail everything I had worked so hard for. So I made a plan. I began by reaching out to my friends. They had always been there for me, offering support when I needed it the most. I knew they would help me, but it was still hard for me to admit that I needed help. For so long, I had carried the weight of everything on my shoulders. Asking for help felt like failure, but I had to swallow my pride. I reached out to my best friend Olivia, who had been with me through thick and thin. She knew about my condition and understood how much this medical treatment meant to me. She listened as I told her everything about my father, the money, my feelings of betrayal. She didn't judge me. She just listened. After I finished, there was a long pause before she spoke. Sarah, you don't have to go through this alone. You've worked so hard. You deserve better than this. We'll figure it out. Her words were exactly what I needed to hear. I wasn't alone. Olivia helped me come up with a strategy to get back on my feet. First, we focused on getting my medical treatment back on track. Olivia suggested I speak with a financial advisor who could help me explore options for covering my expenses, including potential loans or grants for people with chronic illnesses. I also started looking into state assistance programs. It wasn't going to be easy, but I was determined to make it work. In the meantime, I also worked on regaining my sense of self. For years, I had allowed my parents' opinions to define me. They had made me feel like I wasn't enough, that I could never live up to their expectations. But that had to change. I had to stop letting their words control me. So I started setting boundaries. I made it clear to my parents that I wouldn't tolerate their disrespect anymore. I told them that I needed space to figure things out on my own, and I wouldn't allow them to guilt-trip me into staying under their thumb. My mother, of course, didn't take it well. She tried to guilt me again, telling me how I had no right to cut them out of my life, that I would never make it without them. But I stood firm. It was hard. The emotional toll of everything weighed heavily on me, but I kept reminding myself that I had to stay strong. I had to break free. And slowly, it started to work. My health improved thanks to the support of my friends and the new resources I was tapping into. I began to feel more in control, more like the person I had always wanted to be. It wasn't easy, and there were still moments of doubt, but every small step forward felt like a victory. I knew that as long as I kept moving forward, I would get through this. And eventually, I would come out stronger. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I couldn't keep living like this. I couldn't keep letting them control every aspect of my life, making me feel small and insignificant. My parents had always treated me like I owed them everything: my time, my energy, my gratitude, even my silence. But enough was enough. I wasn't going to be their punching bag anymore. I was done with being their pawn in their twisted little game of guilt and control. The years of passive compliance, of trying to keep the peace at the expense of my own well-being, had led me to this breaking point. It wasn't just about the money, though. The theft of my medical funds was the final straw. It was the years of manipulation, the constant undermining of my dreams, and the way they twisted every moment of joy I had into something I had to apologize for. I had always tried to please them. I had worked hard to earn their approval, to show them that I wasn't a failure, but now I saw the truth. My happiness wasn't something they wanted for me, it was something they resented. Every step I took towards independence, every goal I achieved, was a reminder to them of their own failures. They couldn't handle it. They couldn't accept that I was capable of more than they ever expected. But now, I was going to prove them wrong. The anger I felt was no longer just frustration, it was fuel. It was the fire I needed to get out of the cycle of abuse and control. I wasn't going to beg them for understanding anymore. I wasn't going to cry over their indifference. It was time to take action. I spent the next few days strategizing. I knew I couldn't fight them with brute force. I had to be smart about it. I had to take back my power quietly without them even realizing what was happening until it was too late. The first step was to secure my financial independence. I wasn't going to rely on them for anything anymore, especially not for medical bills or living expenses. I reached out to a financial advisor, someone I had been avoiding for years because I didn't feel worthy of their help. But now I was determined. I needed a plan, and I needed it fast. With the help of the advisor, I applied for grants for individuals with chronic illnesses. I also started a crowdfunding campaign, something I had never even considered before. I was embarrassed at first, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized that I wasn't asking for charity, I was asking for what I deserved. It wasn't just about medical expenses anymore. It was about regaining my sense of self, about showing the world that I was capable of standing on my own 2 feet. I wasn't a charity case. I wasn't a burden. I was Sarah, a woman who had fought for her survival and wasn't about to let anyone take that away from her. While I worked on securing my finances, I also focused on building a life outside of my parents' control. I reached out to old friends, people I had pushed away because I felt guilty about not being able to maintain relationships while I dealt with my illness and my family's demands. I apologized to them for being distant, but I also made it clear that I wasn't going to let my parents dictate my life any longer. One by one, my friends offered their support. Some helped with practical things, offering to help me set up a website for my crowdfunding campaign, sharing my story with their networks, or even offering financial help. Others offered emotional support, reminding me that I wasn't alone, that I was stronger than I realized. It felt like a weight had been lifted from my shoulders. I had built a network of people who genuinely cared about me, and they were willing to help me get back on my feet. I wasn't just fighting for survival anymore. I was fighting for a future. The final part of my plan was to address my parents directly. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I had to do it. I had to confront them not with anger or hatred, but with the simple, undeniable truth. I wasn't going to let them control me anymore. So I sat them down. Both of them. My father, who had always been distant, his face now filled with guilt and uncertainty. And my mother, who stood by him, her eyes cold and calculating. I didn't say anything for a moment, just looked at them, taking in the years of manipulation, the control they had held over me. It wasn't anger that filled me. It was a calm, quiet certainty. I was done. I'm done, I said softly. I'm done living my life under your thumb. I'm done asking for your approval. I'm done being your burden. You can't control me anymore. My mother's face twisted in disbelief. What are you talking about? We've supported you all these years. You owe us everything. I shook my head. No, you don't get it. You've taken everything from me. My money, my freedom, my dignity. And I've let you. But I won't anymore. My father looked at me, his eyes filled with a mixture of regret and frustration. He didn't say anything, but I could see that he understood. He realized that he had pushed me too far. I wasn't the same person I had been a few months ago. I was stronger. And I wasn't going to let them continue to tear me down. You'll regret this, my mother spat, her voice full of venom. But I wasn't scared anymore. I wasn't afraid of her or what she might say. I had made my decision and I was sticking to it. No, I said calmly. I won't. The days that followed were filled with uncertainty, but also a newfound sense of empowerment. I had made the decision to stand up for myself, to stop being controlled by my parents, and I wasn't going to back down. The first step was putting my plan into action. The crowdfunding campaign I launched began to take off slowly but surely. Friends, family, and even strangers who had heard my story offered their support. It was overwhelming at first to see so many people come together to help me, but it also filled me with a sense of pride. For the first time in a long while, I wasn't doing this alone. Every donation that came in felt like a small victory. It wasn't just about the money, it was about showing my parents and myself that I could stand on my own 2 feet. I wasn't going to let their words define me anymore. As the days passed, I made more progress. I secured the medical treatment I needed, and my health started improving. The weight on my shoulders slowly began to lift as I realized that I was no longer tied to my parents' financial grip. I was free, but freedom came at a cost. I couldn't ignore the fact that I had chosen to break away from them. My mother didn't take it well. She continued to call and text me, demanding that I come home, that I fix what I had broken. But I ignored her. Every message, every call was a reminder of how toxic our relationship had become. I couldn't go back to that. One night, I finally decided to take things a step further. It wasn't enough to just move on. I needed to show them the consequences of their actions. So I made the decision to go public with my story. I shared everything, the betrayal, the manipulation, the theft of my medical money, and I did it on social media. It wasn't a decision I made lightly. I knew the consequences of airing my family's dirty laundry in public, but I felt that I had no other choice. My parents had made me feel small, weak, and worthless for so long, and now I was going to make sure they knew what they had done to me. The reaction was immediate. People from all walks of life began to comment, offering support, sharing their own stories of toxic family dynamics and betrayal. It felt like a weight had been lifted, as if for the first time in my life I was no longer carrying the burden of my family's dysfunction alone. But the reactions from my parents were swift and harsh. My mother called me crying, begging me to take the post down. She said I was ruining the family, that I was destroying everything we had, but I didn't care anymore. I had spent my entire life caring about their feelings, their image, their happiness. Now it was time to care about mine. You made your choice, I told her calmly, though my heart was racing. You've pushed me away for the last time. I'm done. I can't live this way anymore. My father, unsurprisingly, didn't take it well either. He was furious, sending me a series of angry texts, accusing me of being ungrateful and disrespectful. He even threatened to disown me. "You'll regret this, Sarah," he wrote. "You've ruined everything. We were your family. No one will ever love you the way we do." His words were hurtful, but they didn't have the power they once did. For so long I had been afraid of losing their love, but now I realized that their love was conditional based on my submission to their control. That wasn't love, it was manipulation, and I wasn't going to be manipulated anymore. The most unexpected reaction came from my sister Lucy. She had always been the perfect child in their eyes, the one they adored. She hadn't always been kind to me, but I never expected her to be this cold. When I saw her comment on my post, I felt my heart sink. "You're embarrassing yourself," she wrote. "This isn't how you handle family problems. You should be ashamed of yourself." Her words stung, but they also made me realize something important. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need to be perfect in their eyes. I had spent my life trying to live up to their expectations, but now I was learning to live for myself. Despite the backlash, I felt a sense of peace that I had never known. I wasn't holding on to the past anymore. I wasn't letting them control my happiness, and I certainly wasn't going to apologize for standing up for myself. Slowly, I started to rebuild my life. I worked on my health, my career, and my emotional well-being. I surrounded myself with people who genuinely cared about me and supported me in ways my family never had. The support I received from friends, strangers, and even online communities was overwhelming. It was as if a whole new world had opened up to me, one where I didn't have to apologize for being who I was. And then a few months later, something unexpected happened. I received a message from my father. It was brief, but it was enough to make my heart skip a beat. He apologized. Not for stealing my money, but for treating me the way he did. He said he was ashamed of his actions and that he wanted to make things right. I was torn. Part of me wanted to forgive him, to take the opportunity to heal our relationship. But another part of me knew that I had come too far. I had rebuilt my life without him, and I wasn't sure if I could trust him again. So I didn't respond. I left his message unread. For the first time in my life, I realized that I didn't need his approval. I didn't need anyone's approval. I was the one who had the power to define my life now. It's strange how life can shift so quickly when you finally make the decision to stand up for yourself. After everything had happened, I found myself in a position I never thought I'd be, and finally free from the toxic grip of my parents, but also uncertain of what lay ahead. But with every challenge I faced, I grew stronger. Slowly but surely, I began to rebuild my life, piece by piece. The crowdfunding campaign was a success. It wasn't just about raising money for my medical treatment anymore. It was about something far bigger. It was about reclaiming my power, taking control of my future, and showing myself that I could do this without relying on anyone else. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was thriving. My health improved with every passing week, and for the first time in a long while, I could see a future for myself that didn't involve constant stress or anxiety. I could feel my body healing both physically and mentally. The weight of everything that had happened, all the emotional and financial burdens I had carried for so long, slowly started to lift. I was no longer a victim of my circumstances, I was a survivor. I took steps to secure my career and build financial independence. I found a job in a field that I had always been passionate about, something that had seemed impossible when I was living under my parents' roof. It was hard work, but I loved every second of it. For the first time in my life, I felt like I was doing something that mattered. I wasn't just working to pay bills, I was working to build a future for myself. The hardest part was learning how to trust again. I had spent so many years seeking validation and approval from my parents, always feeling like I wasn't good enough, always afraid of disappointing them. But now I realized that their opinion no longer mattered. I was the one in control of my life, and I was the one who got to decide what success looked like for me. Over time, I reconnected with people who had supported me along the way. Friends who had never judged me, people who had seen my worth long before I did. They reminded me that I wasn't alone, that I had built a network of people who loved and cared for me. I began to realize that family didn't always mean blood. Sometimes the people who truly care for you are the ones you choose to have in your life. As my career began to take off, I also found time to focus on myself. I started practicing self-care in ways I had never allowed myself to before. I joined a yoga class, began eating healthier, and learned to appreciate my body for what it was capable of rather than focusing on its limitations. I began to feel a sense of peace, a sense of calm that I had never known. But even with all the progress I had made, there was still one thing I had to face: the decision to cut ties with my parents for good. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but it was something I had to do. For years, I had let their toxic behavior define me, and I realized that I couldn't move forward while still holding on to the hope that they would change. My father's apology had been a turning point. Part of me wanted to believe him, to think that he was genuinely sorry for the way he had treated me. But deep down, I knew that forgiveness didn't mean going back to the way things were. I had already forgiven him in my heart, but that didn't mean I had to let him back into my life. I had to protect myself from further harm, so I made the decision to cut them out completely. I didn't respond to my father's message. I didn't answer my mother's calls. It was the hardest thing I had ever done, but it was also the most liberating. For the first time, I was choosing myself over them. I was choosing my peace over their chaos. It wasn't just about walking away from my family, it was about walking toward a future where I could be truly happy, free from their constant criticism and manipulation. Over the next few months, I started to see the full impact of my decision. My health continued to improve, my career flourished, and I started to make plans for the future that didn't involve my parents. I even began to dream again, something I hadn't done in years. I realized that I had the power to create the life I wanted, and it was a life that didn't need their approval or validation. I had built my own family, people who supported me, encouraged me, and believed in me. And I had built a life for myself, one that was entirely mine, free from the shadows of my past. I had taken the long, difficult road to get here, but I was finally in a place where I felt whole. I was no longer defined by my parents' actions or my illness. I was Sarah, a woman who had faced unimaginable challenges and come out stronger on the other side. I didn't need anyone's permission to be happy, and that was the most powerful thing I had ever realized. The months passed, and my life began to settle into a rhythm I never thought possible. I had a routine now: work, health, self-care, and most importantly, the sense of peace that had been absent for so long. I had learned to trust myself, to rely on my own strength rather than seeking approval from others. The day I cut ties with my parents was the day my life truly began. I had no idea how I was going to feel about it, no idea how long it would take for me to truly move on, but every day that I stayed away from them, every day that I focused on my own growth, it felt like I was making the right choice. It wasn't easy, though. I had moments where I wondered if I was being too harsh, too unforgiving. I was the one who had walked away, who had made the decision to sever ties, and part of me wondered if I was just being a coward. But every time that doubt crept in, I reminded myself of how far I had come. I had fought for my independence. I had rebuilt my life from the ground up. I wasn't going to let guilt make me question my decisions. One evening, while I was at my apartment, I received a message that I hadn't expected. It was from my sister Lucy. We had always had a strained relationship. She was the golden child in my parents' eyes, the one who could do no wrong. She had always been the one to side with my parents, and even when I was at my lowest, I never felt like she truly had my back. So when I saw her name flash on my phone, I hesitated before opening the message. "Sarah, I need to talk to you. Please, it's important," it read. My heart skipped a beat. I hadn't heard from her in months, and this message felt different. Hesitantly, I responded, unsure of what to expect. "What is it, Lucy?" I typed, my fingers trembling as I hit send. Minutes passed before she replied, and when the message came through, it took me a moment to process what I was reading. "I know I've been a horrible sister, and I've stood by Mom and Dad when I shouldn't have. I've been thinking a lot lately, and I realize I've hurt you more than I ever knew. I'm sorry. I want to make things right." My hands shook as I read those words. Was this a trick? Was she just trying to manipulate me into letting her back into my life? But then I read the message again, and something shifted inside me. I had to be honest with myself. For the first time in years, Lucy was reaching out, not to tear me down, but to apologize. It was raw and it was genuine even if it came too late. I stared at the message for a long time, weighing my options. Should I let her back into my life knowing how much damage she had done? Or was this just another form of manipulation, a way for her to regain control of the situation? I wasn't sure. But I knew one thing for certain: I couldn't keep running from the past. I had learned so much about myself, about what I was willing to tolerate and what I wasn't. And while I had cut my parents out of my life, I wasn't sure I was ready to do the same with Lucy. Maybe there was a chance for healing. Maybe we could find a way to move forward even if we couldn't go back to the way things were. I took a deep breath and typed my response. I'm willing to listen, Lucy, but it's going to take time. I hit send, knowing that this was a small step towards something I had never thought possible: reconciliation. But I also knew that it wasn't going to be easy. The damage that had been done couldn't be erased overnight, and the trust I had lost couldn't be rebuilt in a single conversation. But maybe, just maybe, it was a step in the right direction. Over the next few weeks, Lucy and I started talking more. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't always comfortable, but we were both trying. We had a lot of baggage to unpack, and I knew it would take time to work through everything. But the conversations were different this time. They were honest, they were raw. And for the first time in years, I felt like my sister was actually seeing me. Not as the person I had been when we were children, but as the person I had become. I wasn't the same Sarah who had let my family walk all over me. I was stronger now, more confident, and I wasn't afraid to stand up for myself. In the midst of all this, I couldn't ignore the small voice in my head that kept telling me that everything had changed. The old me, the one who was constantly seeking approval, the one who was terrified of losing my family, was gone. The new me was someone who knew her worth, who understood that family could be toxic and that it was okay to walk away when it became too much. As I stood there looking out of my apartment window, I realized that my journey wasn't just about surviving anymore. It was about thriving. I had taken control of my own destiny, and I had learned that I didn't need anyone's approval to be happy. I had learned to trust myself. I had learned to forgive myself for the mistakes I had made. And most importantly, I had learned that family doesn't always have to be blood. It can be the people who truly see you, who support you, and who love you for who you are, not for what they expect you to be. I didn't need my parents to validate my worth. I didn't need to prove myself to anyone. And most importantly, I had finally learned to live for myself. I was no longer waiting for someone to give me permission to be happy. I was the one who had the power to decide my future, and I was ready to embrace it no matter what it looked like. The days that followed were filled with a sense of peace I hadn't experienced in years. My life was slowly becoming something I could finally be proud of. I had fought hard to get to this point, and while there was still much to learn, I knew I had crossed a line that would forever change the trajectory of my life. The decision to cut ties with my parents, to stop living under their toxic control, was the hardest thing I had ever done. But in doing so, I had freed myself in a way I never thought possible. The weight that had been holding me down for so long began to lift. For the first time in years, I felt like I could breathe again. I had my own space, my own life, and I no longer had to worry about whether my parents would approve of my choices. I no longer had to seek their validation. It wasn't that I didn't love them, it was that I loved myself more. The self-doubt that had been a constant companion in my life slowly faded away. I learned to trust myself to make decisions based on what I truly wanted, not on what others thought was best for me. And as I began to rebuild my life, I found that I wasn't just rebuilding my future, I was reclaiming my past. In the months that followed, I continued to build my career. I took on projects that excited me, ones that I had once been too afraid to pursue. I worked tirelessly, but this time it felt different. I was working for myself, not for anyone else's approval. My health continued to improve as well. The stress that had once consumed me, the constant worry about my medical condition, began to dissipate as I found a sense of balance. I no longer felt like I was fighting a losing battle. My illness no longer controlled my life. Instead, I was learning how to manage it, how to live with it, and how to make the most of the time I had. As my confidence grew, so did my sense of independence. I began to take risks to venture out into the world and experience things I had once been too afraid to try. I traveled more, explored new hobbies, and even started a blog to share my story with others. It felt good to have a voice to share my journey with people who could relate. It wasn't easy. There were days when the old patterns crept back in, when I doubted myself, when I wondered if I had made the right decision in walking away from my family. But each time I questioned myself, I came back to one simple truth. I was finally living for myself. And that was all that mattered. Over time, I began to rebuild some of my relationships. Lucy, my sister, and I started talking more. It wasn't easy, but there was a sense of healing in the air. We both knew that things would never be the same between us, but we were learning how to communicate in a way that didn't involve manipulation or guilt. She apologized for the hurt she had caused me, and I realized that part of my healing process was learning to forgive her as well. Forgiveness wasn't about excusing what had happened, it was about freeing myself from the anger and resentment that had weighed me down for so long. And as I forgave her, I felt the chains that had bound me to my past begin to loosen. But forgiveness did not mean reconciliation in the traditional sense. I still kept my distance from my parents, and I knew that would be the way it would be for a long time. Their actions had caused too much damage for me to ever fully trust them again, but that didn't mean I couldn't find peace. I had learned to set boundaries to protect myself from their toxicity, and that was enough for me. I had finally learned that I didn't need them in my life to be happy. The day I realized that was the day I knew I had truly moved on. I had my own life now, one that was mine to create, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me again. Looking back, I could see how far I had come. I had once been a woman full of doubt, fear, and insecurity, afraid to make waves, afraid to stand up for myself. But now, I was someone different. I was confident, independent, and strong. I had learned the hardest lesson of all, that I was worthy of love, respect, and happiness just as I was. And in that moment, I knew I was ready for whatever came next. My journey wasn't over, it had just begun.